Hey, we're live.
Hi
There
there.
we go. Hi, Tom. Hi, Larrin.
Oh, hi, Jason. Hi, Larrin.
Hi.
Welcome to FFIB. I'm Jason, and that's Tom, and we're joined tonight by a very special guest. We're joined by Dr. Larrin Thomas. You might know him from Knife Steel Nerds on Instagram. You might know him from his book that he's written on the topic of knife steels, which I can't remember the title offhand. It is just Knife Steel Nerds, isn't it? Knife Engineering. There you go.
You were just telling me how you like to pretend you know about the guests. You can't even get the title of the book.
Well, the truth is I gave my copy of the book to a friend of mine who's a material science engineer, and he was trying to tell me why. God, what's the steel that you used on wristwatches? Is it 314?
316.
316. That's it. Thank you. Yeah, he was wondering out loud why that steel is not used on pocket knives, and I said I think there's a good reason. If it was good for pocket knives, they'd probably use it, and he was challenging me on that. So I sent him your book, and hopefully he'll read
you
it.
want to know the answer? You want to know why 316 isn't used in pocket knives?
Sure, tell us.
Yeah.
Because that steel's got like 0.02% carbon in it or something. I mean, it's an austenitic stainless steel, it's called. So when you take iron or normal steel that we use in knives, you heat it up really hot before you quench it, for example. It'll go non-magnetic. It goes non-magnetic because it transforms to a steel phase called austenite. The phase just means that it has a different arrangement of atoms. So the iron atoms, they sit in some arrangement. They're all happy.
Right.
In a different temperature range, they're happy in a different arrangement. So they transform to that arrangement. An austenitic stainless steel is designed for the austenite to be happy at room temperature. So those steels, they have really high corrosion resistance, and they've got good ductility. So, they can form them into watch shapes and things like that. So they're great for that. But it's not going to be very hard or wear resistant. So watches will definitely scratch when they're made out of 316. But yeah, it would be a horrible knife steel. So it would, the edges would deform, it wouldn't hold an edge. It wouldn't work. It'd be great in salt water though. So
he was actually horrified to know that knife guys don't care whether their knives are magnetic or not. He said, "Don't you care? Isn't that important?" I said, "No, not even a little bit." And he goes, what if there's metal around and it's on your knife? Well, then you remove the metal, I suppose.
If I worked in a shop that was grinding, it would matter, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, what if you're trying to take down a Bond villain and he's got a giant magnet room that then attracts you to the walls? And he's like,
opposite polarity though, and it repels me away.
Hopefully
like,
his teeth
are
made
you
out of
now,
440.
Bond. And it's all because
hopefully his teeth are made out of 440, so he sticks to the magnet, and then we can get rid of him. Well, it looks like we already have people in. More so than most shows, we hyped this one a little bit. We posted it on Instagram. We posted it in the group a few times. So I know everyone in the group is going to be excited to hear from you because probably to most of the people in the knife group, the thing you're most famous for is MagnaCut. Either tried it or wants to try it, and we're all forming opinions about the steel. So having you here to talk about it is really great. So again, thank you for being here.
Yeah, I'm excited.
I understand you have a little bit of a history with Spyderco. You were talking to Tom about it before the show. Do you want to?
Yeah, well, Tom was a little concerned. He's like, "Now, do you know what Spyderco is? Are you aware of Spyderco?"
They have a holes. They're the ones with the holes in them.
Yeah. Like, we know you're into steel, but we don't know what you're into. But yeah, I've known the guys at Spyderco since I was a kid, since I was a teenager. So, my dad would take me to hammer-ins and knife shows and things. So, I would meet Sal, I'd meet Eric. I know Ed Shamp, of course. So he and I were talking on the phone just a couple days ago.
Is that right?
Yeah. So I have, I put in my pocket just for this interview. So I carried this knife for probably a decade. This is a Shamp small Persian. It's very gross, as you can see, because it's cut a lot of things, mostly tape covered things. So shout out to Ed Shamp. He's a cool guy. I actually don't remember. I think Sal gave me this knife. I think, but it might have been Ed. I might not remember. It was too long ago. So I really liked this knife. It was a good knife for me at the time because, you know, I had some higher end custom knives and I was afraid to carry those. And I'd ruined a custom that my dad had made for me.
Oh my goodness.
So we went to a knife show, and we'll get back on track to Spyderco in a second, but we went to a knife show.
Sure.
I had a couple knives in my bag, and they were in my toiletries bag along with my contact solution. And the contact solution leaked out. And so it horribly corroded, you know, the knives that were in there.
Yeah.
The stuff is very caustic. So, you know, that was really brutal. So I started to carry a little bit more affordable knife in the Ed Shim. So it had a good balance between, you know, it was a nice knife, but not my nicest knife, you know. So anyway, so I knew Sal and Eric some, I knew Ed, and I went to school in Golden, Colorado. So I did my PhD there in Colorado School of Mines. And you Spyderco fans may know that that's where Spyderco is located. You may have heard that before. So I did a factory tour while I was there. My dad and I did a Catra study at that time also. That was the first time I ever did anything with Catra. So we took an AEBL knife, a 154 cm knife, and then my dad made a knife with AEBL 154 cm Damascus. We did it 50-50. And then we cut with that. So I don't know what year that would have been, you know, over 10 years ago. So yeah, we go way back with Spyderco.
That's awesome. That Persian, I just want to say, when Dan Spider Tam watches this, he's gonna have a fit when he sees that knife. It's so cool. One of our members collects. He collects. That's his thing. He's gonna be really jealous that you got that from Sal.
Yeah, it's a nice knife. I mean, it's a goofy looking knife, like many Spydercos are, with the hole and everything. And then with the Persian influence, I mean, it's even more odd and different. Which when I first got the knife, I think was probably a detriment. Like, oh, what is this? You know, I want a generic tactical folder or something, not this creative thing. But, you know, as you get older, your tastes develop, and, you know, something different is good. And, you know, it feels good in the hand. The curves actually do something to the design. So
yeah,
I find that Spyderco's, more than a lot of brands, are very purpose driven. And when you use them, you find the utility in the shape and the form that there's a lot of thought that goes into every little detail, and it tends to be purpose first and then perhaps aesthetic second. So
that's what I like about
actually using the knife. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole drives a lot of the design.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a lot of what gives it that distinctive look. And that's also why Spyderco can be controversial. You know, there's definitely guys that are like, these are the ugliest knives I've ever looked at. And you're like, well, you know, you're entitled to your opinion, but, you know, you should give it a try.
Mm-hmm. It's designed to be perfect tool. That's what's beautiful about them. It took me a while when I first got into knives. I'm like, why does it have a dumb hump on it? Mm-hmm. Oh, then you hold it and like, well, this is what a knife is supposed to be. This is what a knife can be. This is function, which I've then started finding the beauty in the engineering aspect of like the littlest details, like when it's closed, that like area, just all the little stuff about the shape is thought through.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Larrin, would you mind dipping into the topic of MagnaCut?
Yeah, sure. Where do you want to start?
Well, it's been on the market for, gosh, at least a year. Isn't that true? Maybe a year and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was announced. No, I'm just going to get it wrong. But yeah, it's been over a year. But when it was announced, it was brand new. So I mean, the factories were not given any prior to its announcement. That's how new it was. So small samples had been given to some custom knife makers,
right?
You know, who gave feedback and they made knives out of it, and that was great. But we didn't have enough to send significant amounts to the factories at that time. And so it was given a kind of soft release where we had one heat of the steel. It's called a heat when you make a batch of it. And we sold all of that. You know what? I think it was, you know, so now I know it wasn't released because it was released on April Fool's Day, because I said this isn't a joke. And so, yeah, and it was sold by Niagara themselves, the company that sells it. and they were really mad at me because of all the phone calls that they were getting, because I don't remember how they were selling it. It might not even have been available through the online store. Maybe they only did phone calls. I don't remember
the
now.
day that you announced that on Instagram, me and Jason called one of our friends that are a dealer. I'm like, call Spyderco right now and get the first person to hear about this in. Like, it spread like fire that day.
Yeah. Anyway, they vowed to never sell MagnaCut directly anymore. Like, you know, the knife companies buy it. Custom knife makers that are buying a lot of it will get it from them. Everyone else has to buy it from the separate suppliers that they sell to, because they said it was too much work answering the phones for all the people that wanted it.
Tom and I were at Blade Show 2021, and we ran into John. For the life of me, I can't remember his name. He was the president. Yeah, John from Crucible. And
John Sheasley.
That's him. Mm-hmm. And he was telling us about how they were having to fold it into their production schedule, that they couldn't just ramp up and, you know, make unlimited quantities. There's only so much steel they could make in a month, and they had to ramp it up. But he said you almost had to change the name. Isn't that true?
Almost changed the name. Well, we argued a lot about the name. So right. The original name I wanted was not MagnaCut. It was Hypercut. So Hypercut is the name of a steel that came out in the early 70s by a company called Vasco, which stands for Vanadium Alloy Steel Company. Hypercut was the first, or one of the first, 70 Rockwell C high-speed steels. So, you know, a steel like Maximet, it gets its lineage in part from Hypercut.
Okay.
And the trademarks were long expired for Hypercut. And I was like, well, let's pay homage to Hypercut, you know, the old high-speed steel, and we'll name our new steel Hypercut. And he was like, nah, I don't think it's going to work. And he's like, I'll ask the lawyer and we'll see. And I don't even know if he asked the lawyer, but all I know is the eventual answer was no. So, you know, we brainstormed like a billion different names, you know, silly ones. So I did a bunch of brainstorming with my dad and with Sean Houston. So, you know, we had silly names, bad names, good names, okay names, you know, dumb names. So a lot of it was just putting different words in front of cut, you know, like Hypercut. You know, I wanted cut in there because it's a knife steel, and I wanted that to be apparent. I did not want it to be called S55VN or whatever, because the letter number schemes are just impossible to remember. Yeah, I still
get theory on steel is, no matter how good the steel is, if you have a name that sticks out, Maximet, LMAX, Vanex, they sound fast, they sound awesome, and they sound intense more than S45VN.
Yeah, and I think the letter numbers, they just don't work. I mean, you can't remember them. So Bowler, you know, they have their M390, which is a hot steel these days. They came out with a higher wear resistance version called M398 a couple years ago. And I still occasionally get comments on my M398. You know, whenever I have an M398 bullet point on something, they're like, "Oh man, you messed up right here. You meant M390." And I'm like, "No, I didn't."
No, kind of didn't.
So yeah, I didn't want a letter number. And also S45VN came out like, I don't know, 6 months or a year before MagnaCut, which was bad timing. I didn't even know about it before pitching MagnaCut. And a big criticism of S45VN was like, oh, it's just an incremental change over S35VN, which may or may not be true. We don't have to get into that. But, you know, I didn't want MagnaCut to be put in that same category. You know, like, this is a new steel. It's a new product. It's not just part of the same product line. It's outside of it. So, yeah, I don't remember what our original question was, but
I'd like to get into the 45VN. I look at the data sheets and I can't figure out why it would be desirable over 35 or 30. Does it satisfy a need that wasn't there previously?
Well, I think I'm trying to think of what is public and what isn't. I think it is public that they wanted something that was more corrosion resistant than what they had. And it fills that. And I think part of that was driven by LMAX. So LMAX was a semi-popular steel. It's known for its good corrosion resistance. It has higher chromium than the S series of steels from Crucible. And so Niagara pitched it to Crucible saying, like, let's give it a try and see if this fills a niche. Now, as to the question of whether it does fill a niche, I think it and S35VN can definitely coexist. I don't know if S45VN and S30V need to coexist because the wear resistance of those two steels is pretty close, and their potential hardness is also very similar. Their toughness is similar. So everything is similar about them, but the corrosion resistance is higher on the S45VN.
Okay.
So I don't know if both of those steels need to exist, but the S45VN is more expensive than S30V, just the way that it has to be produced with the higher chromium and things. So both of those steels, S30 and S45VN, will probably continue if I had to guess.
Yeah. Brian, we got off track a little bit from Mag. I was curious to know your take on its reception by the knife community. Are you pleased with how it's been received? Do you feel like it's being used? Is it being used correctly?
Well, the reception has been great overall. I mean, there's always going to be some trolls. I remember there was a guy that kept tagging me on Instagram with MagnaCut sucks memes. And I had to block him. I might not have blocked him, but his memes were not funny though. Like they were just really bad. I mean, if he could turn a good joke, maybe I wouldn't have blocked him. But he kept tagging me like every week with these horrible memes. That is, they weren't just funny because they were hurting my feelings. They just weren't funny. Period. Right. So
that's an odd choice to insult someone and then tag them to show them that you're insulting.
Yeah, I mean, he's trying to get under my skin, was the other reason I blocked him. Like, and then I'm sure he thinks like he won, but I'm not seeing your dumb memes anymore. So
he's not on FFIB, if that means anything. Boom.
He could be, but who cares?
Yeah, I don't think it was us.
So yeah, the overall response has been great. This past Blade show, I mean, 2 Blade shows ago, like, some people were hearing about MagnaCut, they were excited, there were some Sabenzas in it that were being sold and some Demcos and things like that. But, it was pretty rare still. But with more and more announcements, by this past Blade show, nobody was talking to me about knife engineering, my book at all. They just all wanted to talk about MagnaCut. I went to some of the different knife companies along with Niagara, and most of them knew who I was. But when they didn't, they were like, "Oh, he invented MagnaCut," and they're like, "Oh, okay, him." So, MagnaCut is going to be remembered after I'm gone, probably, and before long, no one will remember that I invented it. So they'll just know MagnaCut and not me.
We made sure that it's an homage to you. Someone in the comments, can you put up the emoji for MagnaCut? For Larrin, we did it for you. You'll never be separated from the steel as far as we're concerned because the emoji is glasses. It just makes sense.
Okay. Oh, I was on private chat. I wasn't seeing the comments that were coming in. Okay, I switched over now.
So you can't be separated. That's it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's other people that have been connected to different steels. One is like S30V was developed by Dick Barber. So I'm surprised there's still people that go by Dick, but I've known him since I was a teenager also. So when I was getting into steel as a teenager at the knife shows, I would go to the Crucible table or booth or whatever they had at the time, and I would pester those guys. And I remember I'd also call Crucible, just like, and the secretary be like, "Yeah, who do you want to connect to?" And I'm like, "Dick Barber." She's like, "Well, let me see if he's available." Like, "Oh, I think he's in a meeting." I'm like, "I'll wait." So just put me on hold.
Did you tag him in memes with Dicks?
No, I don't think I don't think tagging people or memes were a thing at that time. I mean, we'd go on the forums, like Blade forums and stuff, or like knifeforums.com. Defunct forum. You can't go there anymore.
Yeah, the only bummer with that is you have to upload the photo somewhere else. Then you got to bring it into the Hyper Tom. It's a pain in the neck.
Yeah, and then anything that was uploaded to like Photo Time or whatever back in the day, all those pictures are dead now.
Photo Bucket.
Yeah, it drives me insane, trying to find stuff. Also, Blade forums, they updated all their software a few years ago. And so it's impossible to search for anything before like 2010 or something.
Oh, wow.
And so, like, you're trying to find some knife history stuff. So I do some knife history things, writing articles and stuff. I'm like, when did this knife come out? Or when did this happen? like, oh, it's 2003, 4, like it's got to be on the internet somewhere, and Googling it is just impossible. But anyway, we're getting off topic. So.
That show is one big off topic, so it's okay.
It's true.
It goes where it goes.
So back to MagnaCut. I know you did a video a few months ago where you discussed the hardness of MagnaCut. There had been a lot of controversy about people cooking it to 62 and how that's too soft, and 61 is just totally soft, and 64 is where you want to be. And would you mind talking about that just for a few minutes? And
yeah, so people kept tagging me, a new knife would be announced and it'd be like, 61 to 62, and they'd be like, we got to get Larrin in on here, tell these people why this knife is a piece of garbage. And I'm like, I don't think it's a piece of garbage. There were tons of S30V, S35VN knives pre-MagnaCut. They were like 5960. And a lot of people were happy with those. There wasn't that much bitching about them. But there's been a rise in, the Rockwell hardness police, or whatever you want to call them.
Yes.
At the same time
as police, it's a thing.
Yeah, at the same time that MagnaCut was released. And so, it became a big deal. And MagnaCut has higher toughness. And so, some enthusiasts, they want higher hardness on it, which is fine. You can want what you want. But I'm not going to go and trash on all these knife manufacturers saying that their knives are no good. And I don't think they're no good, for me, maybe I would want higher hardness for certain knives. But that doesn't mean that a 61 to 62 knife is no good. And that's higher in hardness than the majority of knives that were released pre-MagnaCut. So, in some ways, I'm like, count your blessings. Like 61, 62 was not even a thing hardly a couple years ago.
Right.
So I made the video in part as a reaction to that. I'm like, let's stop bagging on all these people. But even after I came out with the video, I still get tons of people that will send a link to that. And they're like, Larrin says it has to be 63, 64 or it's junk. And I'm like, that is not what I said in the video.
That isn't what you said. No, it's not.
But I did go, in at length about what hardness means, what it does, what it doesn't do, how you get there, why it's difficult to get to high hardness. So, there's a lot of details in there. It wasn't just, 61 to 62 was okay. That wasn't really the end point of the video. That was just kind of the impetus of it. So I definitely recommend you go watch it if you're interested in what Rockwell hardness means, if you haven't seen it already.
I'm sure there's a link from knifesteelnerds.com. You can also find it on YouTube. Isn't that where you hosted it? Was YouTube?
Yeah. So I have a YouTube channel, which is Knife Steel Nerds. And I don't know, it's got 8 or 10 videos on there. I've only done one a month, and then I skipped a month or two. And so, there's not that many, but I try to make sure they're high quality. I'm not crapping out videos 3 times a week or whatever.
The production quality was good. It had a whimsical music behind it, and I liked it. It was well done.
Yeah, that's number one complaint about a couple of my videos is music in the background. So I've listened, and the other ones I since have not had music, I think.
Yeah, you think the ratio should be 50-50, and it's actually more like you want the audio at 92 and you want the music at 8. It has to be way off. Otherwise it drowns it out.
Well, the editing is a skill itself. Like you'll watch big YouTube channels, like multi-million-dollar followings, and they'll bring in music real loud behind them, like especially going into transitions and stuff. And you don't really notice it. Like you barely even know that it's happening. And so I'm like, oh, well, Mark Rober, like he's got his volume dialed up to like 1,000. So like, I can bring in some music down low and it should be okay. But if you use the wrong music at the wrong volume at the wrong time, then it becomes very grating to people. And when you're editing the video like 1,000 times, you start to ignore it. You're just hearing yourself talk.
Right.
And so, yeah, I'm trying.
There are some guys watching right now that are wizards at sharpening knives. They're very, very good. And a few of them have gone so far as to buy best testers. And they're in sort of an arms race to see how low they can get. And if I remember correctly, somebody broke 40 recently with a pocket knife.
Sean Snyder was in the 40s, I believe. He got
one. I've seen claims of people getting single digits. Yeah. But I don't know. They might be. There's a lot of intricacies to the thing, like how tight you have that thread on there, because there's 2 different methods. There's like little clips you can get which have one thread that you can cut through, but there's also a holder where you you tighten the string on there yourself, and you can go really tight or really loose. That will have an effect on there. Also, how fast you push through the thread will affect. So, I mean, these are things that people talk about, like, oh, the best tester, the edge on up tester, it's a piece of junk because, like, I can manipulate the result. But, like with any type of test, you can manipulate the result. Like engineers, we have symposiums about like what the standard procedure is for a test. Like how much force must be applied in this type of test and what rate of speed must it be performed and everything. So yeah, the number like 40 grams is not 100% rock solid. Like someone else might test the same knife, especially a different part of the edge, and they might get 35 or 55 or 60. But it definitely gives you a good range. And I have used the tester. All my capture testing, I check the knives that I sharpen with the best tester to make sure that they're in the right range. Normally I'm shooting for like some maximum value, like, oh, if I'm over 150, I got to go back and make sure it's all under 150. And I also used it for a corrosion of edges study. So I took a carbon steel, I took D2 and a stainless steel, and I dipped them in lemon juice for different periods of time, and then I tracked the best sharpness over time. So those are the main times that I've used it. But yeah, when I'm sharpening, I normally use it. I've also done some consulting for various groups, like sharpening companies or knife companies that want to test different things. And so, the best tester is always involved in that.
I'm afraid to buy best tester because I'm like, my edges are sharp and they're shiny. I don't want to get in an arms race. Tony Kim and Sean Snyder trying to beat their numbers. It's good enough. La 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 la.
Tom, you'd spend 4 days just sharpening the same knife, not even eating or sleeping, trying to chase. I would keep on
sharpening a toothpick until I could beat these guys. I just don't.
No, the best tester is really good at deflating your ego. You're like, oh man, this knife is so sharp, and you go on there and it's like 350. And you're like, oh my.
Yeah, it's me. Larrin, do you have an opinion on an optimal maybe optimal degrees per side on a sharpening of MagnaCut?
No,
and then
I don't.
a finish of the edge. You don't have an opinion?
No, well, so one thing that Sean and I have talked about a lot, so I can't take credit for this, is when you use a fixed angle system, like an Edge Pro, or I don't know what those other ones are called. I have an Edge Pro, so I forget the names of all the other ones.
KME, TS Prof.
Yeah. I also have a TS Prof that mostly is sat in the box. But that's no fault of the TS Prof. That's my fault. But so you get a perfectly triangular edge. It's like dead flat on both sides. When you sharpen by hand, there is convexity to it.
Right.
And so when someone is sharpening by hand, sometimes they'll have ridiculous angles. They're like, oh, I'm sharpening at like 3 degrees per side. And the reason why they can get away with that is because there's so much convexity to it. It'll behave like a much more obtuse edge, where if you went 3 degrees per side on the Edge Pro, it would be like tinfoil. You could just destroy it.
You can't even set a guide sharpener like less than 10 or 12 or something like that usually.
Yeah, well, you'd end up scratching up your blade and everything. But even doing 10 degrees per side is pretty brutal with a fixed angle sharpener.
Right.
So the recommendation I always give is just try a little bit lower angle than what you're at right now and see what happens. If it came from the factory at 17 per side or whatever it was, try 15 per side, and you'll be like, oh man, this is cutting great. You can try another angle, another degree down, and see how it's doing. And, you might start to see some microchipping or some rolling, or, you drop it and the tip breaks off a little bit, then you're like, okay, maybe I went a little too far, and you can back off. So, you don't have to get too worried about like, oh, what is the factory doing? I got to match that, or like, oh, am I going too shallow or something? Like, just be brave and do it. Go a little finer, a little thinner, and try it out. You'll see how much better it cuts.
You heard it here, guys. Don't be scared.
And you have a wider, shiny part. It's wider bevel. It looks more shiny. That's what you need. More shiny.
That's right. So I have a feeling that Sean is watching right now. I believe this is him. And I know I set you up with a question with too many variables to get a decent answer, but I just wanted to hear what you'd say. Like, I do appreciate the fact that there's the blade thickness, there's the edge, the thickness behind the edge, there's the heat treat. What are you going to use the knife for? Is it a fixed blade? Is it a folder? Like, I know all that's a variable, but I don't know. Generally, knife users like to have a quick and simple answer, don't they? And they'd like to. They were hoping, probably. I was hoping you would say.
Well, the quick and simple answers are already out there. You know,
right.
you read a generic article on sharpening, and they'll say do 20 degrees per side or 15 degrees per side or whatever. And so, you know, those are nice, divisible by 5 numbers. And you know, if you try one of those, I'm sure it'll work fine. Don't do 25. You know, unless it's an axe. You know, you should be able to do 20.
Right.
So.
Right.
Me and Jason got our first Koenigs, and we were so excited. And then we both got them and tried to cut a piece of paper. And I didn't want to tell Jason, I'm like, Jason, this is the dullest knife I've ever bought in my life. And when it was like 30 degrees per side. It was ridiculous. It took me forever to reprofile back down.
Yeah, it happens sometimes.
It was a beautiful edge. It was beautiful. It was just a little whisper of an edge, but yeah, it was pretty steep. So yeah, it's a common topic for Tom and I to recommend somebody reprofile their Koenig. Well, Larrin, I think a topic that everyone's excited to hear about is CPM 15V. 5 more V's. It's a multiple of 5, and I like those. So 10V we're familiar with, 15V. Other than being able to chart it in your book in the appendix, I don't think anyone's ever really used that steel beyond Sean Houston. So what can you tell us that we need to know about that steel?
Yeah, it's relatively rare, but the steel's been around forever. Well, I mean, since early mid 90s. So I mean, one of the guys that developed it, he's even dead. It's been around that long. I talked to the other guy that worked on it. He's in his 90s. He's still as sharp as ever.
Is his name Dick too?
His name is not Dick, so it's Ken. So
okay.
It's easier to say with a straight face. So the interesting thing about 15V's development is that when they developed 10V, that was in the 70s, CPM steels were brand new. The powder metallurgy system was brand new, that way of making tool steel. What they did is they said, oh, you know, vanadium steels have the highest wear resistance. Now we've got this technology where we can add in more vanadium. Before, the limit was about 4 or 5%. Beyond that, they couldn't even make the steel. It would literally crumble apart if they tried to hot roll it out. So they said, let's max it out. So, you know, they tried 6, they tried 8, they tried 10, they tried 12. You know, they did this range of vanadium content. So like, oh, beyond about 10 or 11, then the vanadium carbides start to clump up again, and they get bigger and the toughness drops off. So we'll max it out at 10. We'll come out with 10V, and this will be this new super wear resistant steel. So how did they manage to do 15V? Well, these guys, Bill and Ken, no Dick, they looked at why those clumpy carbides were forming in there. And what they found was that once they added enough vanadium, the vanadium carbides would start to form in the melt, in the liquid. So with powder metallurgy steel, you've got this big vat of liquid steel. You add in all of your ingredients. Then it goes through this tiny nozzle and gets sprayed with gas to form powder. So all those little powder pieces are like tiny ingots of steel. So instead of this big giant ingot of steel that slowly cools down, you get these tiny little pieces of powder that then you hip under high pressure and temperature. So when you go too high, the temperature, too high in vanadium, the temperature at which those carbides forms goes up. So the more vanadium you form, the more the steel wants to get that vanadium out as a carbide. The temperature just gets too high. And then so the vanadium carbides form in the liquid, and that way they're already big before they ever go through that little nozzle. So what they found was that they just had to increase the temperature of that liquid steel. Now, if you go too hot, then you start to break down the ceramic refractory that's holding the liquid steel. So there's still limits even then. You know, so the hotter you go, the lower your lifetime is on the refractory. And, you know, you'll even get a little bit of refractory in the steel. Maybe such tiny amounts that it doesn't matter, but you know, you're wearing away that refractory, and this is bad for productivity, especially if you get a breakout, obviously, and you've got liquid steel all over the ground. It's a bad deal. So they tried 15V, 18V, and 20V, not to be confused with 20CV. And so they did lab studies on this, and ultimately they decided like, well, 15V, that's enough. We'll stick with 15V, and that'll be our new super high wear resistance product. And that's been around for a while, but it's a very particular product. It's got a small niche of users. So being used in knives, it's been a pretty limited, number of knives produced in it. Definitely no factory knives that I'm aware of. But yeah, Sean has made some customs out of it, obviously.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's 15V. It's got more wear resistance than 10V. It literally is just 5 more Vs. That is a reasonable way of looking at it. Yeah.
Don't tell these guys that, because that's going to become a standard. It's like, oh, M398's 8 more M's. Like that's too simple. That name just makes too much sense.
So it's got more wear resistance than 10V and less toughness to go along with it. That's a normal trade-off. I've got all the curves on my website, and that Mr. Rogers video I did, you can see the curves, where you add more wear resistance, you get less toughness. This is like a limit that is difficult to get past.
Right. I think I saw you say something like the edge retention is going to approach that of what we already have with Maximate, but it's going to be a bit tougher. Is that my paraphrasing?
I might have said that. I'd have to look back at the numbers, but the 15V, it's normally at a little bit lower hardness than the Maximate, which helps with toughness.
Right.
And it has how does the carbide content compare? I don't remember that off the top of my head. They're probably similar. But the 15V carbide structure, it looks pretty good. So the 15V toughness is decent. It's similar really to M390 at a similar hardness. So people look at things like 10V and 15V, and because the wear resistance is so high, they sometimes assume that the toughness is real bad. But it's not really the case. So because it's not a stainless, you get more wear resistance for your amount of carbide. So they're all vanadium carbides, where M390 is a bunch of softer chromium carbides. So you have to get more chromium carbide in there to get the same amount of wear resistance, and all that carbide drops your toughness. So 15V doesn't have that issue because it's only vanadium carbide.
I think a lot of people in the group, especially me, have certain steels they kind of use as benchmarks. How would you compare the wear resistance of 15V to like S90V? That's kind of like my go-to steel because it works. It's stainless, lasts forever. Is 15V even more wear resistant than that?
Yes, it is.
That's pretty good. Really good.
Yeah, so it's way up there. You were expecting me to expand on the answer, but no, just the answer is yes.
I just want you to say yes so people can hear it. That's all. Because I say it, no one's going to listen to me. Because like, Tom, you don't know shit. So hear it from you.
I've got a big Catra test where you can see, the Catra test is a wear resistance test. It's an edge wear test. So you can compare the steels. I've also got little dotted lines on the chart. And what that dotted line is an estimate of the effect of hardness. So different heat treatments might result in a little bit different shape. But if you use those dotted lines on my charts, you can see like, okay, if I heat treated the steel, 2 points harder, this is the effect it would have on its wear resistance. So you can compare steels like that also, even if I tested them at 2 different hardnesses.
One of the users is asking about the book. It's a good time to talk about it. Guys, every time anybody asks me ever about edge retention or hardness or corrosion resistance, that's what I'm referring to. Everything you would want to know is in the appendix, frankly. And then if you're interested in making knives, there's a whole section on what you need to know to make knives. If you're interested in that, there's a whole section on edge, and it's a wonderful book. So if you're in the hobby and you're already buying more knives than you need,
don't show them that it's super thick.
No, you get your money's worth. You get lots of information.
There's a lot of pictures. That's why it's so thick. The book itself has about I figured this out the other day because I'm writing another book. It has about 75,000 words in it, which is enough for like a 200-page book. But there's so many pictures in there that it ends up being huge. Plus the appendix, which isn't really like written text. So yeah, it's not a difficult book to read. It's easy to read.
Can we get it from your website?
No, you can get it from Amazon.
Amazon.
Is Amazon the way that you
Never heard
make
of
the
her.
most money is my question. Whatever, that's what I always promote is sometimes Amazon for people hurts. If that's the way to do it.
Well, it's a self-published book printed by Amazon. So I make the most money when you buy it from there. So I got an email the other day from a woman who said, my 13-year-old son, he's getting into bladesmithing, but I don't buy any products from globalists. So where can you get the book? So there are a couple other places you can buy it from. I think USA Knife Maker
Must have been
sells
a flat
it.
earther.
So I don't know. There's people that got opinions on Amazon. That's fine. So you can buy it from USA Knife Maker. There's a couple other places you can buy it in Australia from Gameco. There's a couple of suppliers in Canada you can buy it from. I might have links to those on my knife engineering page on my website, but sometimes I don't update that. So.
Going back to the questions. I've been told that the 15V used by Spyderco has a unique recipe, and I believe that's in the heat treatment. Can you confirm that?
Well, I can say what's public. So Sean and I, we're tight. So I know some things that I'm not supposed to know, but I can't share them.
Let's not tell any secrets we're not allowed to know. But
so what is public is that Sean handpicked the heat of steel that was used. So meaning they made this particular batch. It has this composition. Sean said, that's the one that's the best. That's the one we're going to use.
Wow.
So, and Sean worked with the heat treating company that Spyderco uses to dial in the heat treatment for that heat. So it's not 100% custom heat treatment because it's made in large batches, but it's a near custom heat treatment, meaning it was dialed in for that production facility. So those are the things that we can say publicly, I think.
understand.
Because people have asked why his logo is on the blade. So that explains how he got his logo on the blade.
Yeah. So Sean, his logo wasn't just slapped on there. He had to put in some work on getting that dialed in. One thing I can say about dialing in a heat treatment, without getting too technical, just because of limited time here. When you austenitize the steel, that's when you heat it up hot before it's quenched down and then tempered. When you heat it up hot, if you go up in temperature, the hardness of the steel increases after it's quenched and tempered. If you go too hot, the hardness starts to come down again. And it comes down because you're getting too much retained austenite. So austenite was our high temperature phase that we had in watches and didn't want in knives. So when you heat it up too hot, you're stabilizing the austenite. And so then it sticks around even after you quench it down to room temperature. And even after you go into cryo after, sometimes you'll have too much. So you went too hot, you got too much retained austenite, the hardness is coming down. And not only is the hardness coming down, but the properties are going to garbage. So it'll be extremely difficult to sharpen, the edge will roll easily. And there are even some knife makers or knife companies that are like, oh, well, we got a little too hot, but it's still like 62. It's no big deal. And no, it is now garbage. So they should throw them all away and not release them. So when you have a knife that's just impossible to sharpen, if you're a good sharpener, like you keep getting a burr and then you try to take off the burr and the edges is never sharp, it is often because of retained austenite. So heat treating, when you're dialing in a heat treatment for maximum hardness, it's like Price is Right rules. So, you want to get the perfect number without going over. And sometimes you need to give yourself a little factor of safety also, like let's get a point less in hardness and avoid a rich heat, we'll say, going over. So that's what Sean is doing when he's trying to dial it in is find that perfect Price is Right number. So.
Can you tell us a little bit about CATRA testing? I've seen criticisms of it as not being necessarily real world testing, but is that the official scientific process for measuring wear resistance on a piece of steel?
Well, what CATRA tests is edge wear. So it tests that and it tests nothing else.
Okay.
So there are various criticisms of CATRA. Some of them are realistic. Some of them are because they don't understand what's going on. But sometimes people get an odd result in another test, and they say, "Well, that's because the Catra test is not realistic, and it's because this is a real world test." But the reasons why they got a different result from Catra is often not the reason that they think it was.
Right.
And I could give some specific examples, but so the Catra test, it tests edge wear, and that's it. So when I do Catra testing, I use the same edge geometry every time. I heat treat all of the blades so that I know how they're heat treated, and so that I know what I'm comparing. That's one thing that I do. Now, you could just test all kinds of different knives in the Catra test, and that would put in a bunch of extra complications, which are complications that you often see in YouTube testing. It's not that their test is bad, but they're calling the video M390 versus S30V when it's actually Kershaw versus Spyderco. Like the heat treatment is different, the edge geometry is different, the sharpening was different, and it's a test of two knives, and that may be a useful piece of information for you. Like, oh, this test did better in a rope cutting test. I'm looking for that in my knife, and so I'm going to buy the one that won the battle. But that doesn't mean you necessarily learned which one's better between S30V and M390, even if we're restricting it just to the rope cut test.
I think that really shows itself with Cedric and Ada's data. So Pete at Cedric and Ada does a rope cut test on twisted sisal rope, and if you look at his spreadsheet that he has, I think he's tested something like 15 knives on M4 with M4 steel, and the results are scattered across there, where some of the knives are really terrible and some of them were extraordinary. And
you'll
like
see,
you said, there's so many other variables other than the steel and the rope.
Yeah, I mean, you'll see a knife he tests with the crappy heat treatment and a bad edge geometry, and it cuts like 200 times, and then a really thin high-end custom knife, and it does like over 1,000 cuts or something.
Right.
And so that's no fault of him necessarily. There's obviously going to be variability in his test, as there is with any test, but he's testing knives, not necessarily steels. So, sometimes people want me to pile on, like, oh, isn't Cedric and Ada testing by Pete, isn't it horrible? Like we need the gold standard Larrin. And I'm like, no, I like all testing. Let's have more testing.
He's not claiming it's something that it isn't. He's just telling you, I'm testing a knife and I'm cutting rope with it. And this is what I found.
I do think Pete should be a little braver though, because he'll get criticism sometimes, like, oh, why did this do so much better than this? And he's like, well, like, look, this isn't scientific. And I'm like, have a little more confidence in what you're doing. Science is testing, so, what you're doing is scientific in a way. You're testing things, you're comparing things. The dog's asking to go outside. That's the bells in the background.
We're not so fancy that we can't let the dog out. It's okay.
Yeah, well, I'll let her out in a minute if she gets annoying. But yeah, so I mean, he's doing real testing and there's real science involved. He's trying to control his variables, which is all good stuff.
Yeah.
But you can speculate on why things might do better than another thing without saying this isn't science. All right, she is getting annoying, so I am going to let her out. So
go for it.
I'll be back.
All right, we'll wait here.
You know what? I don't think Larrin probably does a lot of patio brick cutting tests. Do you?
Let's ask him.
She'll have to come in like 2 seconds, and then I'll have to leave again. Oh.
Absolutely. Can you speak to the utility of perhaps taking a knife and cutting a patio paver with it? Do you feel like that's useful for understanding the edge retention of a knife?
Patio paver? I don't even know what that is.
Like you go to Home Depot and you get the little patio bricks, and they're made out of smushed something. You take a knife and you hit it with a hammer, and then you determine whether the edge is worth it or not. Do you feel like that's a good test?
So I mean, there are guys that like will like chop into bricks or stuff like that with a knife. And what I will say about that is, even when a test isn't realistic, like, oh, you used a knife and it broke in half. So, this isn't a realistic test. You broke the knife in half. In engineering and materials engineering, we always test things to failure every single time. So a Catra test, it has a fixed end, but if it were an even better test, it might go until the knife won't cut anymore. Just because we have to test things until they're bad to be able to compare things. So, like this broke with 5 joules of energy and this broke with 10 joules of energy. That is a comparison. If you have 2 knives, you cut into a brick and neither one breaks, what did you learn? You didn't learn anything. So
you didn't hit the hammer hard enough.
Yeah. So, I mean, at least you learned that they can both chop into a brick without breaking. You did not learn this steel was better than this steel or this geometry was better than this geometry. You have to test it until one breaks and have a difference, either a steel difference or a geometry difference or a sharpening difference or whatever to know. And so when people say like, oh, what a dummy, he chopped into bricks, like what is even the point of that? There can be a point to it. There actually can be. So testing things to failure, comparing 2 things and figuring out which one is superior for a given test is better. But just like with rope cutting, the end result is going to be like 10 degrees per side and Rex 121 at 72 Rockwell. And like, is this the best knife? And for a lot of people, the answer is no. Now, if your main test was chopping bricks, then you'd end up with, CPM 1V or 5160 or, even 420 with 45 degrees per side, or maybe worse. That's going to be the best for chopping bricks. And so when we're testing all these variables like hardness and toughness and corrosion resistance and edge wear and all of that, we're figuring out what steels are more optimal, what heat treatments are more optimal for different applications, and not just what is the best. And so because a lot of YouTube testing is rope cutting and cardboard cutting, sometimes that's their only metric that people are looking at. Like, oh, this one cut 200 more cuts on the rope when Pete tested it. That's the knife I want. And that may not be the knife that you want. So.
Very well put. Sorry, Tom. I think Sean is slow pitching us a bunch of excellent questions here. This Facebook user would like to know the almost magic balance of MagnaCut. Hoping you can explain how you developed it. And what is it that makes this so effective as a tool steel, but also so stainless?
Okay, so I'll go back in time again. So we're talking about Ken and Bill. They developed 15V. They also developed S90V. So they were real top dogs at Crucible. They were doing some cool stuff in the 90s. So S90V, what they did is they took S60V, which a lot of people forgot about, also called 440V. It had 17% chromium in it, and it just wasn't as good as they wanted it to be. They looked at the microstructure, and it was mostly chromium carbides. This is the problem with M390 and Elmex. They're mostly chromium carbides. They're easy to sharpen, but they don't have the properties of a 10V, for example. And so they're like, how can we fix this? And they said, well, let's just try lower chromium and see what we can get with that. And so they reduced the chromium from 17 down to 14. And then they balanced the carbon and the vanadium. And they're like, hey, we increased the corrosion resistance and the wear resistance versus S60V. And the toughness is pretty comparable. If anything, the S90V is a little better. So they were able to get more vanadium carbide and less chromium carbide just by reducing the chromium. So this is something I've known about, for a long time. And they continued that path with their S30V and S35V. And that's partly why they have 14% chromium, because they already learned that with S90V. So I'm looking at this trend, this trend of 2 data points, S60V to S90V. We reduced the chromium and we got better properties. It was still just as stainless. I'm like, how far can we extend this out, and still improve our properties even further?
Right.
Like, well, the amount of chromium that's in the steel is not how much chromium you get in solution to contribute to corrosion resistance. So let's look at S30V, for example. It's got 14% chromium in the steel, but about 10.5% of that to 11% of that is in solution for corrosion resistance. The rest is tied up as a carbide. So once it forms with carbon, it can no longer form with oxygen at the surface, because what chromium does to give you corrosion resistance is you form a chromium oxide layer at the surface, and that prevents iron from forming with oxygen and rusting. So if you've only got 11% chromium in solution contributing to corrosion resistance, what is the extra 3% chromium for? It's just forming carbides. So, but metallurgists seem to have assumed that you needed the extra chromium, just because once you balanced everything and heat treated it, some of that chromium is just gonna be in chromium carbide and you can't get away with it. So I said, let's set the chromium down to the level that we want in solution and just balance everything so that after you heat treat it, that chromium isn't in any carbides. So that's what I did with MagnaCut.
So you still have, because MagnaCut is like super stainless, right? So you don't have to have like 17 or 20% chromium. You found what is actually bonded to making it stainless if it's a low chromium value?
Well, that was mostly an accident. So I targeted S30V, S35VN levels of corrosion resistance with MagnaCut, and it ended up much higher. And the reason is because the chromium carbides weren't in there after heat treatment. So what happens when you have a chromium carbide in the steel, when the steel forms that carbide, it steals the chromium in that area. It takes it away. And so there's a little ring around the carbide, which is lower in chromium than the rest of the steel. So even though you can measure with special techniques, how much chromium did we have in that tiny area away from the carbides? And it'll tell you had 11%. But if you were able to test right up against the carbide, it would be 9% or something, let's say. And the carbides themselves are also like reactive regions of the steel that lead to corrosion. And I did know this in a way because I had tested 3V, which doesn't have chromium carbide after heat treatment, and its corrosion resistance was better than expected. And I had tested 420, which is, a so-called junk steel, which has almost no carbide left after heat treatment. And it also outperformed relative to other steels. And I was like, oh, that's weird. I don't know why that would be. And then we made MagnaCut. I tested the corrosion resistance, and it was, destroying the S30V and the S35VN. No matter what I did, it wasn't rusting to the same extent as those steels. It was looking more like M390 or Vanex. I really had to push it to get rust spots on there. And then I was like, oh, well, of course, it's because we got rid of the chromium carbides. Like, why didn't I think of this before? So yeah, I'd rather be lucky than good. So
did you imagine this as a formula on paper, or you just kind of put it together and test a lot of stuff till it work? Because this is mind-boggling to me how.
Well, in an ideal world, I would have tested a lot of things and seen what would work, but it costs tens of thousands of dollars to make a heat of steel. There are lab melts of powder metallurgy steels, but I contacted a couple of those companies and they were like, yeah, we'll do it for 30 grand. And I'm like, well, Crucible does it for barely more than that. And then we get 5,000 pounds to test, so it's just the cost wasn't there. So with MagnaCut, I basically got one shot at it. And so I had this idea of reducing the chromium, but getting all the other elements to balance is extremely difficult to do just with some back of the envelope estimates. You need to do a series of heats, we're going to vary our carbon and vanadium content, for example, and make sure we dial it in so we get the perfect steel. But I didn't have that luxury. So I did use modeling software, so called ThermoCalc. And that is a software that you can punch in a composition and it will tell you what phases are present at different temperatures. So meaning you have this much carbide, and it'll tell you how much alloy and carbon you have in solution. So an estimate of how much chromium is in solution for corrosion resistance, how much carbon is in solution for hardness. And so I played with that a bunch to try to, agonizing over it, if I push this a little higher, maybe this will be a little better. But, the model seems to be doing something funky over here. Maybe that's not realistic. Maybe I need to avoid that region just because the model seems to be breaking down over there. All these little things, and then just worrying is the model actually going to be accurate enough? And it wasn't just the model. I'd done a bunch of experiments. So part of the reason why the appendix is so full in knife engineering is because I took basically every knife steel I could get my hands on and just heat treated it at all different temperatures so that I could punch that back into ThermoCalc and say okay, if we trend out carbon in solution versus the hardness that I measured, so carbon in solution that ThermoCalc predicted tested versus the hardness that I measured after heat treatments I did,
Right.
what kind of trend am I getting? And you'll get some scattered points in there. The model's not perfect. But like, okay, I know that if I've got 40 points of carbon in solution, 0.40% carbon, that should be around this hardness number, after quenching. And then that'd temper down, a couple of points lower. So I knew things like that. I'd done my corrosion resistance testing and compared that to chromium in solution, all these different things to try to work out my model. So sometimes when you say they used a modeling software, it's like, oh, you took the easy way out, just like, oh, you type in the thing like, I want to make a new knife steel. Like, I want it to be really hard and tough. And
I thought you were out there with an anvil, folding over pieces of steel, layering it, hitting it with a hammer until you got it right.
He was using Osmo, Tom.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. So it started with an idea, independent of the modeling software. And then I used the modeling software to give myself the best chance because I had one chance pretty much. If it had ended up close, like, oh, we wanted it to be 64 as quench, we got 62. We probably could have gone back in, and said like, okay, we'll bump up the carbon a little bit. We got close, just not all the way there. But fortunately we got it right the first try. So
I know I can go into my kitchen and I can make salad dressing with the ingredients in the pantry. Is it conceivable to do that with steel? Can you go into a lab and have a little quantity of iron and all the other items and add them to a crucible and literally like make your own steel? Or is that not doable? You were talking about
you can do it.
Heat of steel.
Yeah, you can do it. There's a couple limitations of doing that.
Okay.
One is that steel is difficult to melt. So that's why cast iron exists. It melts at a really high temperature. So when you watch like these backyard guys that are like melting aluminum or whatever, and like it's difficult to do that.
So I can't use propane then?
No, you have to have induction heating to melt with. The other thing is you're melting in air. And so you're going to get a lot of oxides in your steel unless it's under vacuum. So they have various methods for avoiding this in large scale production. Like they'll form slag on top and it's a big thing of steel and all of those things. But in small batch production, you're going to end up with a lot of oxides in the steel, which are detrimental to toughness. So normally that has to be under vacuum. And so these big vacuum induction melting furnaces, they are very expensive and they're very large. You're unlikely to have one in your garage. So the dog's back. So I'll be back in just a second.
Well, Jason, you got my hopes up. I was going to go mix up a batch. Take some nails and screws, put them in a pot, put them on my stove, melt them down.
Yeah. Maybe not, huh?
I guess not.
Not this time.
Okay, I'm back.
So, Larrin, we've simulcast this into YouTube as well, and it's live at the moment. And we have a question from Steve here. Wants to know your definition of tempering. And how does the heat treater know or prove successful tempering?
Okay, so I'm going to avoid the mistake of assuming that he knows at all what tempering means, because sometimes people talk about just like, oh, the tempering being good or the temper of the steel.
Yes.
When they're referring to the overall heat treatment.
Yes.
But in metallurgy and especially steel metallurgy, there's a specific definition of tempering, and it is a step in the heat treatment process. So you heat up the steel hot. I was calling that austenitizing. You could just call it heating it up hot if that helps you. Then you quench the steel. So, a blacksmith, they'll be quenching in water or oil. In higher alloy steels like MagnaCut, you can just do a gas spray, so like, nitrogen spray, and it'll cool it fast enough to harden. So that's the hardening step, the quench. And after that, you can then temper the steel. So after quenching, the steel is very hard, but it's also a little brittle. And so when you temper it, you're decreasing the hardness some for the benefit of toughness. So that treatment so a typical temperature for that would be 400 degrees Fahrenheit, around 200 Celsius. That's a normal temperature for tempering. So a lot of knife makers, they'll in fact just put their knives in a kitchen oven to temper because the temperatures are pretty realistic. So that's what tempering is. You're relieving some stress from the quench and increasing your toughness at the cost of some hardness. And you can't really get away with not tempering. Like, let's say, oh, I just want maximum hardness. Let's just skip the temper. One issue is that if you ever heat the steel above the tempering temperature, it's like tempering it, so if you don't temper, it's called room temperature tempering, basically. It was tempered at 70 degrees. So if you go to 120 degrees, you're in the desert or whatever, you're now tempering it a little bit. And if the knife company is grinding the blade and then putting on an edge with sharpening, it's going to be heated up hotter. And so if you temper it at 300 or 400 degrees, you have a better chance of avoiding over tempering during the manufacturing process. So that's one example. But also just, you can temper at 300 degrees Fahrenheit and the hardness will be basically the same as not tempering it, but you also got an increase in toughness. So typically I recommend tempering at least 300 degrees, but yeah, this is knife maker specific stuff, not really knife buyer stuff. So
yeah. Interesting.
I have a question about very popular steel. I think you're carrying it right now. I just want to get, and I'm not asking you to bash on anything. Really not. VG10.
I've already been outed because today I called VG10 the Honda Civic of knife steels. So,
yes,
I was pushed into it, but a Honda Civic, that's a pretty good
great car. Great car.
I would drive one. So I have a Ford Fiesta. If someone gave me a Honda Civic, I would throw away the Ford Fiesta. So
can you guys please go buy the book? We need to get Larrin and upgrade into a Civic. There's nothing wrong with the Civic. Like when you say that, people act like you're wounding them, but in reality, what are we describing? We're describing a reliable, dependable car. You're going to drive for 15 to 20 years. You're going to have no upkeep. It's not going to rust, and you can use it for a long,
it's also
long
made
time.
in Japan, which is good. So that helps with our analogy. So except for a Honda Civic you buy in the U.S. is probably made in the U.S.
They're made in Indiana, about an hour and a half from my house.
Yeah, so I know this because I work for U.S. Steel, and we sell the steel to all these companies, and there's a complicated history of tariffs and everything that is probably off topic for this video. But yeah, VG10 is fine. It's good. It was developed back in the 50s. Spyderco started using it in the 90s. The first knife they used it on, I believe, was a Bill Moran drop point hunter. I'm pretty sure that was the first knife that used it, which is really odd because Bill Moran hated stainless steels. So I don't know how Sal convinced Bill Moran. So he must have gotten soft in his old age. I don't know. But yeah, so VG10, they started using in that Bill Moran drop point hunter. It's probably collectible now. It's probably worth a little bit of money. So yeah, and I think that was its introduction into the knife world. Like it existed, but it was mostly being used in like gardening products or something. I don't know. That's what Sal told me, is that they were using it in like gardening stuff. So yeah, but it's in the same general category as those other conventionally produced steels like 440C, 154 CM. Its reputation is a little better than those just because it's been used a little more recently than those steels. It's probably a little tougher than 154, but yeah, it works fine.
The one thing I noticed about VG10, just obviously it's not S90V, its scratch is really easy. Is that just me?
Well, so scratching is basically dictated entirely by hardness. So, a way we can measure hardness is on the Mohs hardness scale, which is just how easy it is to scratch something. So, diamond is a 10 on the Mohs scale. I don't remember what's a 1, like talc or something. Yeah. And so knives are usually around like a 6 or a 6.5. So if one knife is easier to scratch than another, that's just because the hardness is lower. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I remember, Tom, Pocket Perspective did a few tests of some VG10 and came in the high 50s for hardness on a couple knives. I think 55 might have been 55. As low as he tested.
I don't know if they're making any 55.
I think I remember a 55 and a 58.
I'm pretty sure I've got hardness indents on my knife here. I don't remember it being that soft. Oh yeah, I got a hardness indent right here. I can't show that on the camera though. I'll try. you can try to see. There's no way that's going to
You're
be
brave.
focus.
Just put it right there in the middle of the blade. I don't care.
Yeah. Every time someone does that and it comes with a not good result, it's like, well, that's because you tested the Ricasso. You didn't test the blade. Like, no, you just went for it. It's the steel.
So sometimes a major common issue is not testing on a flat surface. So if they're testing on the bevel itself, then it's going to test lower. It's got to be dead flat. They have to know how to use a tester. It has to be calibrated. But yeah, this is another subject that Sean loves. He loves to watch people use hardness testers incorrectly and talk at them for an hour about all the intricacies of a hardness tester.
We had him on the show about a year ago, and I could tell it was difficult for him to talk about some of these things because they're complicated. Two, his opinion on them is complex, and then third, like it's hard for him to articulate it without getting angry. You did a good job.
Sean's a nice guy. He's just opinionated. He's way more detail oriented than me. So I mean, he'll pester me with 1,000 questions, and usually by the time we're 3 or 4 questions deep, I'm just like, I don't know, Sean. Please stop asking me. I do not know.
That's funny.
Larrin, I wonder if you have an opinion about blade coatings.
Not too much. I mean, the main detriment to blade coatings is that a lot of them have to be applied at high temperature. So that can either over temper the blade or more commonly, this is going to be difficult to talk about in like a short period of time, but we were talking about tempering earlier. Right. How it's around like 400 degrees. There are 2 regimes you can temper in, a low and a high. So the hardness will go down with increasing temperature up to around 600 degrees, and steels with high chromium, especially high molybdenum and tungsten, they'll start to go back up in hardness and peak again and come back down. That's what high speed steels are. And so you can temper at like 1,000 degrees with those. So a lot of coated blades have been tempered in that high region. And I don't like that high region, especially for stainless steels, because one of the things that happens to get that hardness, the reason why you get it is because you're forming little tiny carbides. You're forming chromium carbides, molybdenum carbides, tungsten carbides. And so when those chromium carbides are forming, they're stealing your chromium from the matrix, just like we were talking about earlier. So I did salt spray tests with MagnaCut, S90V, VanX, LC200N, and I did low temper and high temper. So 400 degrees and 1,000 degrees. The 400 degree ones, they were spotless. They were pristine. The 1,000 degree ones had rust spots on them. Even the LC200N, even the VanX, they acted like normal steels after a high temper. So I don't like the high temper for stainless steels. And so if you have to do a high temper to get the blade coating on there, I'd rather you didn't. So.
I think if I remember correctly, the PVD coating from the River's Edge cutlery knives, they originally asked for a different steel for that coating, and they were told that the coating couldn't go on that steel. It would be better to put it on a different steel, and it had to do with the temper. So now
and there are different coatings, and even for the same type of coating, there might be some companies are like, oh, you can do it at 500 degrees, and another company might say like, oh, we can do 450 or whatever. So it depends on the coating type. So just because it's coated doesn't mean that what I just said is necessarily the case. There are cold coatings out there, but I'm not a coatings expert. It's not really been a major interest of mine. So you can bring on a coatings guy and hopefully they can talk your ear off about
I'm trying, but he's under contract.
DLC and PVD and blah blah blah. I don't know. So.
One thing about coatings that surprised me a lot, I'd seen it, I'd heard about it, but we've been seeing a lot of people with like 4V blades that are coated. And for a long time, I think everyone in our little group, that most people didn't use these knives, they just looked at them, assumed DLC made everything stainless, nothing's going to happen to it. We're seeing a lot of stuff like guys who live in Hawaii carrying a 4V blade. It's DLC, but it's all rusted up. And that was really shocking to me that coating on top of a steel doesn't like stop it. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's not something I've really looked into that much. I've heard these stories. Some people even want to avoid coatings entirely because, yeah, they're seeing corrosion and they don't know it's there until like it's gotten really bad. So, I mean, that's something to be aware of. I don't know for sure if it's something you can avoid, but like in other areas of steel, we'll do, like zinc coatings and things like galvanized steel, because that works by different mechanisms. It's not just a surface coating, like painted on stuff.
Mhm.
Like there's an actual galvanic reaction that occurs.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. That hasn't been used that much in knives, though. I've heard that like Henkel's, they will put a little bit of zinc or something like in the handle attached to the steel, and that's supposed to like improve the corrosion resistance or something. That's something else I'd be interested in looking into, but I don't know too much about how well it works.
It's also a trick done with roofing. I don't know if you're aware of that, but if you have asphalt shingles on your home and your home is particularly prone to getting algae buildup on it, you can run a zinc strip at the roof, at the peak of the roof. And as the rain water rinses down the zinc, it leaves a light coating on the shingles and it prevents any growth of the bacteria.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that specifically, but yeah, like using galvanic reactions is a common thing, in like construction and stuff. So it's definitely like, it sounds like voodoo, but it's pretty normal stuff.
So, Larrin, when will we see a MagnaCut paramilitary 2?
Oh, I have no idea.
He doesn't know, Tom. He has no idea.
I mean, even when I do know, I can't tell you, but I rarely know. I mean, when I went to the Blade Show last year, I just like walked in the main hallway, like before you walk into the show, and there was a big old sign for a Case knife from Smoky Mountain Knife Works in MagnaCut. And I had no idea that Case had purchased any, that they had made this knife, or that it was available. So like I ordered one after I saw that, but yeah, you'd think I would hear about these things. I don't know anything. So.
If there's an order for 8 semi-truck loads of MagnaCut, I would assume that's probably Spyderco.
The owner of Smoky Mountain is in the group, and he messaged Tom and I one day, and he said, "Hey, I've got the exclusive rights to MagnaCut with Case." And we were like, "Wow, nice job!" You could tell he had been paying attention to what had been going on, and I don't know. Spyderco is always on the cutting edge of the knife steel portion of the industry, and I think this was a case of I don't know. Word got out, so he brought
Smoky
it over there.
Mountain Knife Works and Case, they're in tight. So, you know, if anybody can get exclusive stuff, it's probably them. So.
Yeah, they're the world's biggest dealer, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So, Larrin, you don't know about that one. All right, that's fine. I remember, Tom, wasn't there a PM2 lightweight in the case? In the prototype case?
There was.
That was MagnaCut, if I remember correctly.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So maybe we'll see it there.
All I know is it's out there. Come on, Sal. Come on. Hurry up.
That's right, Sal. Do it for us.
Yeah, I've seen some speculation online that like there's something wrong with MagnaCut, and that's what's taking time for some of these companies to come out with it. I'm not aware of any major issues. Like there's been, normal like QA stuff that's come up, like, oh, this factory was having this issue with this, and like, oh, that's fine. Like send us some samples and we'll work it. It's like normal stuff. But then when people hear about that normal stuff, they start to blow it up, like there's all these issues. And I know there was one particular guy that makes like higher end production knives that was doing some YouTube videos about issues he was having with MagnaCut. And I was getting a million questions about that. But he hadn't even talked to us at the time about the issues that he was having. So we won't name any names, but I think he's gotten it figured out now. But there are consequences among the enthusiasts. When you start saying things like that, everybody misinterprets it all and blows it way out of proportion.
I saw earlier in the group that Alistair Phillips, who's a knife maker from Australia, he makes a Spyderco model called the Kapara. He wanted me to ask you for best practices on hand sanding MagnaCut. Seems like
I'm the wrong person to ask because I don't have to hand sand it. So
you're not. It's true. So you haven't made a knife from it yourself in your garage then?
No, I've made like 2 or 3 test knives for different things. Pretty early on with Knife Still Nerds, I did some edge impact testing. So
Okay.
I had like a small impact tester, and so I ground out some knives for that. But when I did all the Catra studies, I'm like, I don't want to make 60 knives for this, and so I had Sean do it. So that was a lot easier.
Larrin,
So-
we're gonna get to the hard hitting stuff now.
Okay.
What's your favorite upscale hamburger chain? So you have Shake Shack, you have Five Guys. You may or may not have. Now, there's no In-N-Out in your area, but maybe you've had it. But do you have a favorite hamburger?
Well, I'm from the Western U.S., so
Okay.
When the In-N-Out started coming to Southern Utah, which was like a 2-hour drive away,
Right.
or to Vegas, which was like 2.5, 3 hours, I loved In-N-Out. And so when we fly back home, my wife and I, like to Southern Nevada, a lot of times we will stop at In-N-Out.
Right.
And it's great. Though I have found that as I'm going back to In-N-Out and remembering how amazing it was, and I take my first bite and I'm like, it's not quite as good as I remembered.
The problem with In-N-Out is you have to like know the secret menu, or you feel like a tool when you order, like, I'll just have a double cheeseburger. No, you have to have the animal style, whatever. I feel like they make like the normal stuff not as good as the fancy things. Because I went with one of our moderators, Jake Wright. He's Bearded Gear. He wasn't even speaking English at some point. He was just ordering craziness and had 3 patties and all sorts of stuff. It was delicious, but I've ordered on my own. I'm like, it's kind of just a hamburger.
I mean, it is really good. It's really solid, and the value is definitely there. You know, they're making fresh cut fries and everything. It's really good. But I've leaned more towards Five Guys and Shake Shack in recent years. But Shake Shack is not in Pittsburgh, where I live. It's in Cleveland, which is like a couple hours away, and it's in Philly, which is Pennsylvania, but it's like practically a different state all the way over there. There's people, tons of people in Pittsburgh have never even been to Philly. So Sean will constantly get confused between Philly and Pittsburgh, and he's like, oh, you must love those Philly cheesesteaks. I'm like, there are no Philly cheesesteaks around here.
Yeah, they're good. I mean, I don't hate them.
No, Larrin's going to Permante's.
Yeah, well, my wife doesn't like Permane, so I don't really go there either.
Where do you come down on jumbo? How do you feel about jumbo?
I don't know what jumbo is. What's jumbo?
It's supposed to be like the favorite lunch meat for Pittsburgh. I believe it's bologna, but they call it jumbo.
I'm not familiar with that. The main lunch meat that I learned about here in Pittsburgh is called chipped ham, which I had never seen before, which is just really thinly sliced ham. I don't know. It's not really for me. It's so thin that it just ends up being like a pile of slimy meat.
It's like that Seinfeld episode when Kramer's trying to get the thinnest piece of ham possible. You did it.
He should have gone to Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And they have some kind of chipped ham. I think they call it barbecue, where they like fry it up and put like some barbecue sauce on it or something. I haven't been invited to one of those. I must not have the right friends. So I'll let you know if that's any good once I try it.
Tom, have you had Permante's?
Uh-uh.
It's essentially like a hoagie sandwich, right? But it's hot, and then it has French fries in it. So they put the fries in the burger sandwich.
Yeah, you need carbs on your carbs.
I know. Right. We used to have a place here that was like, put fries in your burger, and it's like this tall. I'm like, I just want on the side. Just on the side is okay.
But I like a range of different burgers. There's a more like smash burger style place here in Pittsburgh. And they go so thin. Like the whole thing is just one crispy
charred
piece.
So it's not just the edges, it's the whole burger.
The crispy. Whole thing is just
it's
charred.
Well done.
Wow.
And I mean, it tastes pretty good. I don't know if it's like my everyday burger, but like once a month or something, I'd like to eat one. So
are you a ketchup on the burger person, or do you just skip the ketchup and go with like tomato and mustard?
No, I do ketchup and mayo.
Okay. Boom. Okay.
I usually have lettuce. I don't go for onions or tomato. Sometimes pickles. It depends on my mood. Like pickles they definitely add a dimension to a burger, and you have to be in the mood for it.
That's one thing I don't like about Five Guys is good, but I don't like is when I get to the register, I feel pressured to look at that big menu of stuff and like, what do you want on it? You're gonna name 9 things while I type them in the computer, and I'm like, I want barbecue sauce, and I want ketchup, and I want everything. No tomatoes.
Little everything, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, interesting. Okay, man. I think the West Coasters are all upset, and they're probably going to call you a Five Guys traitor.
Oh, before it gets too late,
Yes, Tom.
I have a giveaway I want to not forget about. So,
a giveaway. Delightful.
Giveaway. So I'm going to give away some pins. So this is a Para 3 lightweight pen.
Oh, man.
This is a Yo Jumbo pen.
Nice.
And I got a Knife Joker keychain. And I'm going to give this away to the first person who can tell me what the very first sprint run. First sprint run PM2 was.
Dang it, I have no idea. There's no way I'll win.
I think I know.
I have to confirm that I'm thinking of the right one, but I'm checking right now.
I think I know what the first Spyderco Damascus knife was. Oh, do you know that one?
Ooh, I don't.
I don't think there was anything earlier. You
Was it
got
the
any
Native
guess?
540th?
No, nope. The first one was 25th anniversary. So you're way
Oh, wow.
too late.
Boom. There it goes.
So that was the first sprint run.
Paramilitary 2. Sorry, guys. Not the D2 was the first sprint run paramilitary. That was my question last week. But first paramilitary 2 was a 20 CP. It has like the same super light gray scales as one of the newer ones, which is crazy. It gets super dirty, and they're really hard to find, and they're very valuable now.
Okay, so 20 CP is not a CPM steel. So 20 CP is a carpenter steel.
It was. That's right. You got it wrong, Brad. No prize for you.
20 CV is a CPM steel.
It's DTS 20 CP, Brad.
We'll give it to him. We'll give it
Really?
too late.
All right. Brad wins again, I guess.
Brad wins again. Brad, you can give this to somebody else if you want. Yes, that was the first one. And I thought the 20 CP, is that similar to S90V?
Yeah, it's the exact same thing.
Okay.
And they've had a couple different names for that. Like they've called it 420V at different times. I don't know. There might be one or two other names. I forget.
There's an excellent app for the iPhone. Larrin, have you found it? It's called Knife Steel Chart.
Yeah, from Z Knives.
It's really handy. And my favorite part is you can overlay the graphs with the alloy. So
yeah, I did an interview with Zvi, who made that website and the app. That's on my website. I think I have 2 interviews on my website, and he is one of them.
Oh, wow.
But I occasionally get people saying like, oh, the only difference between these 2 steels is this one has manganese and the other one doesn't. But a lot of data sheets on tool steels don't list the manganese. So there's certain things like that where people don't understand what they're looking at. Or Zvi didn't understand what he was putting in. And there are occasional mistakes. It's pretty rare. Most of it is accurate. But
what I like about it is it'll show you the aliases of the steels. So sometimes you'll find a Japanese steel and it'll have 35 different versions from different places around the world. So Brazil made one, and Australia had one, and then Bowler made one. Oh, Brad, no, it's okay. You can be the winner.
Oh, yep. So the first Damascus Spyderco was a Clip It. So it had Tim Zawada Damascus. That was the 25th anniversary.
Wow.
I actually do. I do have a question because it'll tie into something else for Brad. So Brad, I'll give you something. Don't worry, but I want to give these pens to someone totally that's not as involved in the group. Brad, you're getting enough cool stuff. Come on. Crap, I forgot my question I was going to ask.
What is Tom's favorite milkshake place?
How many milkshake places are there?
I eat them all.
Tom has tried them all.
No. Oh, that's a question. What is the first day that we founded the group? What was the first day of the group? And you can find this. You can go to the group right now on your phone and click through if you know where to click. What is the first day of the group? And we're coming up on an anniversary, possibly. I want to get the word out about that. So first day of the group. When did we found it?
I don't even know, Tom. I know you created a Google Calendar invite.
You did that, actually.
Was it me? Oh.
Yeah. So I'll say it's coming up soon. It's not Thursday, but boom. Facebook user, you got it. So October 19th is our 4-year anniversary of the group. And I don't have all the details figured out yet, but we're going to do it up big. We haven't done a giveaway, like a big giveaway in a while. So pay attention. We're going to do a massive giveaway for the 4-year anniversary.
Tom's going to be giving away a backpack.
Yeah, no, that's what I sold my knives for. So I could pay for the backpack.
So Larrin Tom has a backpack addiction.
Mm-hmm. I have a special backpack. So at U.S. Steel Research, where I work, I did a big project for the company, and we had a steel that wasn't working. And I switched it to a different product that my manager didn't think would work. And it was a big success. We saved the company $2 million, and they gave me a backpack.
To carry the $2 million in?
Was it made out of $1.9 million?
No, it was just a $25 backpack. It's a nice backpack. It's an Eddie Bauer backpack. It's got a USS logo on there. I still use it, but it does feel a little underwhelming from the $2 million that I saved the company.
Do you ever visit the campus in Gary?
I've never been to Gary Works, though a lot of the steels that I design are then made there.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't know exactly why I've never been to Gary Works, but yeah, I hear Gary is a scary place, but you know, there's the song from the movie. What's that movie called? Oh, Gary, Indiana, Gary, Indiana, Gary. I mean, it sounds like a happy place.
They wrote that back when there were dinosaurs on the earth, and since then, it's not the same place. I live in Indiana, and I travel through Gary often, and it's a monument to bad government. It's really it's really sad place to visit.
Is that the pictures you showed us? It's right next to Chicago, right?
It's close to Chicago as you can get without crossing the border, and then. What's particularly sad about it is you drive through downtown and there's maybe 11 sidewalks that are functional and the rest are blown up. And you can tell like they were given a little bit of money and they went and they did a thing with it. And then when the money was gone, they stopped. So there's a really nice library and then there's a nice city county building and then there's a sidewalk that connects them. But then the roads on either side are barely roads. So
without getting political, I did see a YouTube video a while ago where they said that American suburban growth is based on money being put into new developments, and then they don't have enough money, like tax revenue, to maintain everything. And so people just end up moving into the newer, nicer suburbs. So I don't know enough about this to talk about it intelligently or at length, but apparently this is a common issue.
Yeah, it's like a wave that ripples from the center of the community outward.
Mm-hmm.
So the new development moves out and leaves behind a donut effect as it moves, they call it. And then in will move a new community of people and they build it back up again and it ripples out again.
Yeah, so this is a bipartisan issue. So I think we're relatively safe discussing it, but you know, these are problems that could be solved that aren't solved. So just like a million other problems in the world. So.
Yep, most of them have solutions. It's just a matter of embracing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, gentlemen, we've been on the air for an hour and a half, and I'm out of questions. Tom, do you have any questions?
Is MagnaCut gonna, when it becomes super available, are we gonna see things like S30V just go away? Do you think?
I hope so.
Okay. I mean, I'm not just talking about specific knives, but like.
No, I think, you know, S30V, it's got a little bit higher wear resistance than MagnaCut, and maybe it still has some uses. But, you know, maybe we can make modifications of MagnaCut that will, you know, further broaden things. But like you said, MagnaCut still has more work to do in terms of being in everyday knives all the time. You know, there's more and more models coming out all the time. I've got a Hogue knife in my pocket also with MagnaCut. So, you know, it's slowly coming out, but a lot of it is just like, oh, they put in a giant order for S35VN in 2020, and they're still putting all of that in. I know Chris Reeve knives, they're like, oh, our books are like 6 years long, and so we have to get through all of that before MagnaCut comes. So it's just like a slow thing. There's not really any barriers in the way as far as I know, but we have to let all of that happen. We can't just come out with a new steel every year, like, oh, here's MagnaCut version 2.0, and all the knife companies are like, we didn't even have MagnaCut out yet. Like, what? Like, you're screwing us over. And everybody's like, I don't want MagnaCut 1.0. What is this junk? I want the new stuff. So hopefully it'll be a little while before we have something else.
I asked Tim Reeve about it at Blade Show, not to name drop, but he was.
You and Tim, your best friends?
Best friend? No. Tim? Oh, he's over here. No, he was talking about how, like, people think it's not Legos. You can't just interchange the steel. And he was describing how there's other downstream effects. Like, I have to change the processes for finishing the blade.
Yeah.
If you like the luster and the sheen on my blade, I have to figure out how to do that with a different steel. And it's not as easy as just dropping in a new steel. So all that has to be worked out. And that was something I hadn't thought about. To me, it was just like, well, if the hardness is there, you use the same grinder and you just go at it. But that's not really the case. So
Brad's laughing, saying MagnaCut 2.0 definitely coming.
Yeah, you heard
probably when or if we come out with a new steel. I don't want 10% better than MagnaCut, even if it were possible, which I don't know if it is. Maybe if we put in the money to make 10 heats with different variants, we'd be like, oh, like this was the perfect combination where it was a little bit better in these 3 areas. Probably not going to do that. What we want to do is look at our big chart of toughness, wear resistance, and say, like, where are the next places to go. Like, let's make a different product that fills a different niche.
Yeah.
And MagnaCut is really I designed it to be a well-balanced steel. It's not extreme in any one area. It's higher toughness than the previous products just because their toughness wasn't very good. But it's a balanced steel. And so even if we make something that is a little higher in wear resistance, a little higher in toughness, it's probably going to be a more niche product. So I think MagnaCut is hopefully going to be the mainstay product.
Another random question. I'm just trying to think of all things that there's no one else going to answer. Burnt edges. Is that a thing? Is a burnt edge in Spyderco a thing? Okay. I would love to hear about it because you're talking about tempering and going over 400 degrees. And I'm starting to think like they probably do get over 400 degrees when they grind them.
So this is a hot topic. I wrote an article, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago about overheating edges with sharpening on a grinder. I won't say that Spyderco is bad at it or anything. I'm sure there's companies that are worse. But in that article, I put out a bunch of the published experimental information on how the hardness is reduced, near the tips of the edges where they're sharpened. And the knife makers went insane about this. They were really pissed off about it because so many of them are sharpening on their belt grinders. And they're like, well, I'm holding the knife in my hands and it didn't get hot. But what you're sharpening is like a 1 micron volume area, and it heats up really fast. So it is difficult to avoid overheating that.
You don't need the tang to get hot to know the blade's hot. It can be locally hot to right next to the sharpener.
And it's difficult to test for it because a really tiny area that heats up really fast also cools down really fast. So even if you had like a high precision, like IR camera or something, it would cool down very quickly. There's also like paints you can use that will change color with heat, but you have to grind away the paint to put the edge on there. So, you might be able to see a transition area where the paint still is where it heated up. But so, there's some different experimental ways of looking at it, and they all have their issues. Like hardness testing, for example, you can't get too close to the edge of a piece of steel and test it. There's a rule of thumb, like 2.5 diameters or 3 diameters, I forget, because you get a little circle, a little indent, and you need 3 of those away from the edge to have a good test. And so once you get into the tiny tip of the edge at a cross section, even if you are using micro hardness testing, to get to the very tip of the edge, you still got to get within 3 diameters And so then when you're getting a drop off in hardness right there at the tip of the edge, is that because you got too close to the tip? You're not 3 diameters away, or is that because the hardness is dropping?
Right.
So there are ways of looking at it. None of them are perfect, but there are experiments out there which show, sharpening on a grinder, especially uncooled, will drop your hardness from over tempering. And then the question is just, how bad is it? How can we mitigate it? How well is it mitigated? And all of those types of things. How bad is bad? So,
I know in the Spyderco forum, Sal himself responded to this recently by saying all of our knives are ground under coolant. Is that an adequate thing to say that burn edges can't happen, or does it just simply minimize the possibility?
It definitely minimizes the possibility. That's step number one. There are many knife makers and knife companies that are not taking that step.
Right.
So the fact that is being done, I think, is a big kudos to Spyderco, and it means they are trying at least to do the right thing. They're trying to offer the best product that they can.
Excellent. Well, Larrin, this was an absolute treat to talk to you tonight. I'm so glad you joined us. Thank you very much. We all respect your work very much, and we're grateful for the book and for the time and for the knowledge.
Yeah, go buy my book.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everyone that's watching this, it's your homework. We're gonna ask you questions next week out of the book.
Hey Tom, what does it look like?
That's a beautiful cover. It's done by my uncle.
Whoa.
He's a graphic designer.
Like when he says there's pictures in here, it's like even like comparing grain structures of like steel, and there's graphs, and there's a lot of information in here, and it's visually displayed. I know Jason references the charts in the group constantly from your website.
Tom, if you flip back to the appendix, you'll find like the Catra testing. What's wonderful about it is it has an array of all the steels that we all know and love.
This?
Nope.
Don't make him look for it.
We can tell Tom hasn't found it yet. Yeah.
M398. That sounds like a good
look
one.
at that. So it's all in there.
Those are tempering curves for the knife makers. So that most of the appendix is heat treatment information for knife makers. So.
Well, thank you everybody for watching. We appreciate you being here. If you didn't catch it live, you can rewatch once it's posted. And Larrin, I hope you might come back in the future if we have something fun to talk about.
Yeah, I probably won't rewatch the stream that we just did, but other people they can definitely watch it.
My mom will rewatch. Tom's mom has already watched. So
my mom's in the group, and sometimes she chimes in. Sometimes I talk about her, and then I realize she was watching.
Yeah. The only problem with these late night streams, so like when I've done late night podcasts or something, is my adrenaline is all raised now, and I'll keep running through my head all the dumb things I said during the thing. I'm definitely not gonna sleep well.
Not to shame any of our other guests, but I don't know if we've had any other doctors on the show. You knocked it out of the park.
You did fine.
That's true. I am self-conscious about having a PhD. My dad is a blacksmith. I think he went to a semester of college. But so, like getting a PhD was not something I thought about, not even while I was getting my bachelor's degree. I got to my junior year and I'm like, what am I doing next? And I'm like, is graduate school even a possibility? So I feel self-conscious and weird about being a doctor. I work at a company also, US Steel Research. It's a research facility. So, I work with a bunch of PhDs also. So it's not like we call each other doctor,
I would.
So I rarely get called Dr. Thomas. That is a rarity in my life. So
would you prefer professor?
No, because that would be inaccurate since I'm not a professor.
All right. Well, thanks, Doc. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I have to be called Dr. Larrin S. Thomas, PhD. So you have to refer to me by the total. There has to be doctor at the beginning and PhD at the end.
I'm sticking to Larrin Thomas, Master of Magnacut.
I agree. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a nice evening. We'll see you next week, and don't cut yourself.